Hey guys, so I attempted to record our group time today at school, but I failed to push the record button. So here we are at my house doing group time. Um, we're going to have a two-part group time today. This is part one, and what we talked about first today is our author study for the month. It's a good one. We are studying William Shakespeare. So we're going back in time way before World War II. About 400 years ago, William Shakespeare lived during the late 1500s and the early 1600s. And he is one of the most famous writers in the entire world and ever in history. He was a playwright and a poet, and he wrote three main categories of manuscripts. He wrote comedies, tragedies, and histories. So you can kind of think to yourself what you think those mean. Histories are going to be stories based on events in history. Tragedies, if something is tragic, it means that it is very sad or very bad or heart-wrenching even. And then comedies would be more entertainment-based, humorous maybe. So we are going to start reading one of his most famous plays. I'm going to read to you just as far as we got today in group time. And what we're going to do is you guys are going to listen and you're going to tell me if you think it is a comedy, a tragedy, or a history when we're finished. And make sure that you listen because we're going to have some other activities and you guys are going to have some things sent home in your work packets that are going to have to do with our Shakespeare study. So make sure that you're keeping up with this story, okay? One fun thing about Shakespeare is that some of his writing is a little bit hard to understand because he wrote, we call it Shakespearean English now, but it is just an old form of the English language. So some of the words are words we don't use much anymore. And we'll get into that more over the rest of the month. But the version that we're going to be reading is the Usborne version, and so it is kind of rewritten for a younger audience, and it will be written in regular English that you can understand. And it also will have some excerpts from the original play where you can hear some of that Shakespearean English. But the first thing I need to do is introduce you to some of our main and supporting characters. So when they come up in our story, you'll know who we're talking about. Now we're going to be reading Romeo and Juliet, one of my favorites. And so I'm going to introduce you to our main characters. All right. Romeo and Juliet is a story of two families that do not get along. And they live in Verona. Verona is in Italy in Europe. And they have a prince who is in charge. His name is Prince Aeschylus. Prince Aeschylus. He's the Prince of Verona. And he wants to maintain peace in Verona at all times. We've got the first family you need to know about is called, their last name is Capulet. So we have Lord Capulet. Lord and Lady Capulet are married and they are the heads of the Capulet household. Their daughter is Juliet. She is only 13 years old and her parents want her to marry somebody named Paris. So she's only 13 and her parents are already trying to marry her off. We've also got Tybalt. Tybalt is Juliet's cousin. He's very vain. He thinks he's awesome. He has a bad temper and he can be violent a lot. And he really, really hates the Montagues. We have the nurse. They usually just call her Nurse. She's Juliet's nanny. Juliet trusts Nurse more than she trusts anybody else. She basically raised her. Peter is the Capulet servant. He can't read or write, and he has a very small part in the play, but a very significant part. His actions at the beginning of Act 1 definitely kind of light the fire for the rest of the play to take place. All right, the other family are the Montagues. We have Lord and Lady Montague again. They're the heads of the Montague household. And they have a son named Romeo. Romeo is about 16 years old. He's handsome and intelligent and very sensitive. He's idealistic, immature, and passionate. And in the first act, he is madly in love with a girl named Rosaline. And until he meets the beautiful Juliet. So we'll see how that plays out. Benvolio is Romeo's cousin. He is thoughtful, he is a good friend, and he tries to be a peacemaker, and he tries to kind of keep Romeo in line a little bit. Balthazar is Romeo's servant, and Abram is Lord Montague's servant. And then the other people, we've got Prince Aeschylus, of course. Mercutio is, he's related to Prince Aeschylus, but he is not related to Romeo. He is just Romeo's friend. He's very witty, imaginative, hot-headed. We have Friar John and Friar Lawrence, who will play big parts later in the story, but I don't want to tell you too much about them, or you might know what's going to happen. Count Paris is also related to the prince, and he is the one who Juliet's parents want her to marry. And then the other character you need to know about is called the apothecary. An apothecary is someone who kind of sells potions, concoctions. They're not a doctor or a pharmacist, but they sell treatments for things, potions for things, like I said, concoctions for things. So just so you kind of know what that means when it comes up later in the story. All right, so I'm going to start reading. The way our book is written, it is not divided into the original acts. Plays are written in acts and scenes. So we'll be reading what would be part of Act 1. And it starts with a passage from the original manuscript in that Shakespeare in English. So I'll start by reading that. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. The peaceful calm of a summer afternoon in Verona was shattered. Stallholders ran for cover, and parents hurried their children away as two rival gangs of young men brawled their way across the market square. Punching, kicking, and slashing with their daggers, they overturned fruit barrows, smashed shop windows, and beat each other to the ground. By the time Prince Aeschylus's soldiers arrived to calm the disturbance, nearly a dozen of the youths lay injured and bleeding in the dust. The prince's men broke up the fighting, and soon the prince himself came to survey the damage. Then, looking furious, he addressed everyone in the square. This fighting between the Montagues and the Capulets is ruining our city, he said, and I'm fed up with it. This is the third time in a month I've had to stop a brawl in the square. If I hear of anyone else taking part in this silly feud, I'll make them pay with their lives. A few minutes later, old Montague, the head of the Montague family, arrived at the square with his wife. Many years earlier, Montague had fallen out with Capulet, another Veronese gentleman, and their families had begun feuding ever since. By now, even their servants hated each other, and fights and arguments between the two sides broke out almost every day. Montague found his nephew Benvolio Montague brushing himself off after the brawl. "Benvolio," he said, "it's not like you to fight in the street. What happened?" "I'm sorry, uncle," said Benvolio. "It started off as a fight between some of the servants. I tried to stop them, but then Tybalt Capulet came along and drew his sword on me, so I had to fight back. Before I knew it, dozens more lads had joined in." "That Tybalt is such a troublemaker," muttered old Montague. "Romeo wasn't involved, I hope," Lady Montague said anxiously. "Benvolio was a sensible boy, but her son Romeo was much more hot-headed." "Oh, no, don't worry," said Benvolio. "Romeo's been sitting in the park all afternoon moping. He's been like that for days." I know, Lady Montague sighed. He won't tell us what's wrong with him. Look, here he comes, said Benvolio. Let me ask him. He'll talk to me. So Montague and his wife left, and Benvolio approached his cousin. Still in a bad mood, Romeo? He asked. What's the problem? Is it a girl? Romeo sighed a deep, troubled sigh. Her name's Rosaline, he admitted. She's beautiful. I can't get her out of my mind, but she's not interested in me. Romeo, you're always falling for some girl, his cousin said. In a week or two, you'll have forgotten her. Look around you. You'll see a dozen other girls just as pretty. Never, said Romeo, wallowing in self-pity. Rosalind's the only girl for me. It's her or no one. Just then an old man came up to them. They recognized him as a Capulet servant, but Romeo and Benvolio knew better than to carry on the feud. Can we help? Asked Benvolio politely. Oh, sir, sighed the man. My master's given me this list of people to invite to a ball at his house tonight, but what he doesn't know is I can't read, and I don't dare tell him. Will you read it for me and tell me what it says? Of course, said Benvolio. He took the list and read out the names. It says Mr. Martino and his family, Count Anselm and his family, Valentine and Lucio and their families, and Lady Helena and her nieces Rosalind and Livia. Thank you kindly, sir, said the man, and he hurried away. So a party at old Capulet's house, said Benvolio, intrigued. Sounds like a spectacular occasion. Romeo was gaping at him. Rosalind, he said. Rosalind's name was on that list. She's going to be at the ball. Benvolio laughed. Well, why don't we go? He said. We can wear masks. No one will know we're Montagues. Come on, Romeo. It might cheer you up. And when you compare your Rosalind to all the other girls there, perhaps you'll see sense and forget about her. And they set off to tell their friend Mercutio and to find some masks and outfits to wear to the ball.